So let's start with that public attitudes about the topic. Now, it's such a new topic, relatively speaking, that I don't know that a lot of people have formed opinions one way or the other, but there are like, certainly knee jerk reactions. So why don't we begin there? I'm sure you've been studying this for some time. Are you seeing an evolution in public attitudes? And if so, do you see a distinction between certain countries and certain cultures?
So, Brian, it's a really important question. I think that the way that I'll start in answering this question is to contextualize where we are at in understanding this practice, so-called practice of drone warfare. So, for 20 years, we've seen on social media and TV and podcasts such as this, increasingly so, a conversation about drone warfare. It's unclear to me if we actually have consensus on what drone warfare is. Often people will reify the practice to the platform itself, this concept of drone essentialism. So an MQ-9 Reaper, the most advanced drone in the world, becomes in and of itself drone warfare. There's a conversation about drones used for targeted killing only of terrorists, although this is not actually codified in international humanitarian law or the laws of armed conflict. We also see that drones have been applied only in terms of terrorism based upon sort of the prolific nature of these strikes abroad against terrorists. And then finally, conflating drone warfare with remote warfare, which is a broader practice and includes things such as cyber, which is about operational standoff in the field. And this is important to understand because the way that I define drone warfare in my research is much more functionally, is a function of different attributes to include how the drone is used tactically on the battlefield or strategically as almost like a foreign policy, and then with what oversight, whether it's unilateral or multilateral. So big terms to mean policies that are ultimately implemented and managed by governments themselves with no external oversight, or with external oversight through things like the United Nations or regional bodies like, let's say, the African Union. And so, Brian, when we understand drone warfare as a function of the use and constraint, we can start to test empirically public attitudes of support and perceived legitimacy of rightful conduct. And so, in short, I find that one, when you understand drone warfare in this manner, it really has implications for how people perceive the legitimacy of these operations. In other words, when you vary how it's used and how it's constrained, these capabilities, you're going to have different outcomes of legitimacy. For the American audience, what I find is a real proclivity for so-called over-the-horizon strikes, which are used strategically and only with oversight from U.S. Officials militarily and politically. This is not the case for perceived legitimacy in other countries, let's say France, which uses these capabilities much more judiciously, which is to say, it's a tactic with external oversight. And so when we talk about public attitudes of support and legitimacy, we really have to understand how we define the practice, which is going to lead to different sort of empirical designs that allow us to get leverage over these attitudes. I may just add that what I just told you and your audience is actually shifting quite rapidly with the emergence of commercially available, easily weaponized drones that we see in stark display in Ukraine, but also increasingly across the global South and Africa.